Hi everyone. In today's class, we are going to study the part 2 for locomotion and movement. In previous class, we have already studied about what is the difference between locomotion and movement. We have studied what are the locomotory organs present in the paramecium, hydra and the human. Then we have studied about the types of movement, that is amoeboid movement, ciliary movement, flagellar movement and the muscular movement. In today's class, we are going to study about the muscle. Now, when we talk about the muscle, do you remember in structural organization, we already studied about the types of muscle, that is your epithelial muscle, then connective tissue. My bad, epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscular tissue, and your nervous tissue. Among this, we are going to study today about the muscular tissue. When we talk about the muscular tissue, it is a specialized tissue which is made up of mesodermal layer. Do you remember we have studied ectoderm, then mesoderm, then endoderm. Endoderm is the innermost layer, mesoderm is the middle layer, and ectoderm is the outermost layer you will see during the embryonic stage. Write in the comment section, do you still have the ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm in your body, or is it only present during the embryonic section? Then, what are the contribution of the muscle to your body? Whatever weight is there for your body, whatever weight is there, 40 to 50% of the weight is contributed by the muscle. Then, what are the properties of the muscle? Very, very, very important PYQ. So, there are four properties of the muscle, that is your nothing but excitability, extensibility, elasticity, contractibility. Now, when we talk about the excitability, naam pe hi hai, that is excitation will happen. When I say excitation, excitation means nothing but impulse generation will be there. What do you mean by impulse in simple language? It is nothing but ions. Ions matlab positive and negative ion movement will be there. That is, you're going to study in detail in the chapter nervous tissue. So my bad, nervous system. Okay. Now, when we talk about the excitability, when we talk about the excitability, it is nothing but the ability of the muscle to respond to the stimuli. For example, if you'll touch a hot cooker, when you'll touch a hot cooker, immediately you pull back your hand. Why do you do that? So that hot cooker act as a stimuli. Immediately impulse is generated in your body and it sends the signal, okay, remove your hand. Okay, the whole mechanism we will study, but later on. Abhi just understand what is the meaning of excitability. Then extensibility, the name itself says that the muscle will be able to stretch, extend itself. Then elasticity, that is muscle ne stretch to kar liya, then it has to come back to its original position also na. So that coming back to original position after being stretched, we call it as elasticity. Then contractibility, that is cell get shortened, contract kar dena. We are going to study the whole mechanism of the muscle contraction. So these four are the properties for the muscle. Out of these four, one is very, very, very important, which is also shown by the neurons. That is nothing but your excitability. That is nothing but your excitability. Okay, so excitability is shown by the neurons as well as your muscles. Now, there are some other things which you want to study, you can, that's the extra knowledge for you. So the study of muscle, we call it as myology. And how many muscles will be present in your body? That is approximately 639, which gives 40 to 50% of your body weight. Okay, muscle cells, we call it as myocyte. Myo means muscle, cyte means cells. But in this whole chapter, instead of myocyte, we are going to use the term muscle fiber. So remember this, one single muscle cell ko, what do we call it as? Muscle fiber. Now, these muscle fiber, of course, I'm speaking now by using a tongue, that's a muscle. So obviously energy must be utilized, right? So some from where we know that ki oxygen is required in order to break the glucose to provide the energy for any activity. So what is the source of energy over here in the muscle? So glycogen will be stored in the muscle. Now in the comment box, write it, glycogen is what? Is it a carbohydrate, protein, fat, what? Now you must have studied that many glucose will join together to form glycogen. So this is the stored form of energy in the muscle. Whenever energy is required, glycogen will be broken down, it releases the glucose, and in the presence of oxygen, this glucose will release the energy. It will be broken down to form the energy, to release the energy, and that energy will be utilized for the action. Then, as we have studied about the hemoglobin and the blood circulatory system, here also we have a muscle hemoglobin which stores the oxygen. We call it as myoglobin. Then there is another term, hypertrophy. Hyper means more, right? The people who goes to the gym, you will say they will have a good bicep, right? They will have a nice bicep. Now, क्यों बढ़ जाता है इनका बाइसेप? By this, can I say that when you go to the gym, the number of muscles get increases? No, you're born with certain number of muscles. There won't be any addition of the muscle. So फिर then how there is increase in the bicep? Basically, there will be increase in the size of the existing muscle. I was unable to say. Okay, existing muscle will be able to thicken. वो मोटा हो जाता है, and that's how your bicep grows. That's how the people who goes to the gym, their biceps grow. Now this is basically due to exercise, and by doing that, gym people will be using the protein powder also. So this will increase the androgen level in the male, and the major androgen is your testosterone. So male hormone, the whole male hormone, we call it as androgen. Usme major one we call it as testosterone, right? So this was the information about the muscle. Now, if I want to classify the muscle, I can classify based on where it is present, that is location. How does it look, that is appearance or the shape, and what is the nature of regulation for their activities. Whether the sympathetic nervous system, parasympathetic nervous system, all these regulation. But in this chapter, we are only going to see classification based on the locomotion. That's it. Okay. Now, so based on the locomotion, we have three types of muscles. What are the three types of muscles present in our body? One is the skeletal muscle, second one is the visceral muscle, third one is the cardiac muscle. When we talk about the skeletal muscle, first, just look at the structure. By looking at the structure, you will understand everything. When you see the structure, then here, how is the structure? Structure is cylindrical. One second. The structure is cylindrical over here. Uh, One second. Ah, see this. So, how is the structure over here? Okay, let me draw it over here. So how is the structure over here? One skeletal muscle I'm drawing, that is the cylindrical structure which you can see here. So this is basically the cylindrical structure present over here, right? So skeletal muscle is cylindrical. This is very important with respect to the PYQ. Okay, skeletal muscle is cylindrical, but when you see the visceral muscle, which is also called it as smooth muscle, which is also called it as smooth muscle. Why visceral muscle? Viscera means what? Viscera means internal organs. When you'll do MBBS, you will study in detail, internal hollow organs, and all these definitions will be there. But right now it is not required. So simply you can remember the internal organs. So internally you have organs. Those organs where which muscles will be present? Your visceral muscle. So we call it as smooth muscle as the visceral muscle. What is the shape over here? If you'll see, it is a spindle shape which has the tapered end. What do you mean by tapered end? Can you see these pointed ends? See here, pointed ends. These we call it as tapered end. So what is the shape? This is PYQ, spindle shape, and the fusiform shape. Now, what is the shape of the cardiac muscle? Again, if you'll see, the shape of the cardiac muscle is cylindrical. Second pay will speak about the nucleus. When you see the nucleus, see here, many nucleus is present in the single cell, and where these nucleuses are present at the periphery. So when the many nucleus will be present, this condition we call it as sensatium. This is PYQ. Okay, and where it is present at the periphery. Then fusiform may, sorry, my bad, visceral pay, you will see uninucleated, only single nucleus, and that is also present in the center. Cardiac may, again the uninucleated present in the center. Then let's go on the striation. Can you see the dark band, light band, dark band, light band, dark band, light band? These bands we call it as striation. So two types of band will be appearing over here based on whether light can pass or it cannot pass. So dark and light band, these gives dark and light band striation, that is dark striation, then there won't be any striation. Then the dark striation and won't be any. So this we call it as dark light, dark light, dark light. So very prominent striation will be present. That's why we also call it as striated muscle. Then here there won't be any striation. We call it as non-striated muscle. And then cardiac may you have again striation will be present, but fainted striation will be present. That's why when I ask some people, what are the types of muscle, they simply say striated and non-striated. That's not the correct way to speak about, because when we talk about the striation, skeletal muscle as well as cardiac muscle both are striated, right? So the correct way is skeletal muscle, visceral muscle, and cardiac muscle are the types of muscle present in our body. Then let's see whether the muscles are branched or not. Can you see any branching in the skeletal muscle? I cannot see. So these are the unbranched cells, right? Unbranched muscle. Can you see the branching over here? No. So these are also unbranched. But if you see, can you see the branching over here? See, these are the branches. These are the branches. So the only muscle which is branch is your cardiac muscle. Then which one is voluntary and which one is involuntary? If I want to lift my hand up, I can lift it by my own way, right? If I want to punch you, I can punch, right? So these are voluntary muscles. It is under the control of the voluntary neuron. But the visceral muscle, let's take an example of your stomach. Now you ate pizza. You ate 9 pizzas. You do not have any space in the stomach, but you want to eat popcorn. Will you be able to eat popcorn? Or you'll say, stomach, start digesting so that I can eat popcorn. Will stomach listen to you? No. So these are involuntary muscle. What about heart? Huh? When last class mein Rahul saw Anjali, his heart started beating very fast. Can he say stop beating, stop beating, stop beating? Or the transportation of blood will be there. Your stomach is not listening to you, so you will say stomach, you will get punished. Heart, don't transport blood to stomach. Can you say like this? No. So these are also involuntary muscle. Very, very, very important pyqs. This whole table is pyq actually. Okay. Now when we talk about the blood supply, the abundant amount of blood supply will be present in the skeletal muscle, and the richest one will be present in the heart. Then myoglobin, that is oxygen carrying pigment, it will be abundant in the muscle, and your cardiac muscle less will be present in the smooth muscle. Then fatigue. Morning first period you are writing, second period writing, third period writing, fourth my period. I'll say keep on writing, do not stop. You'll say, ma'am, how much we are supposed to write? We are tired. So actually it's not you who is tired. Who is tired? Your skeletal muscle. Your skeletal muscles get fatigue very easily. Okay. And which one never ever get? Actually smooth muscle bhi hoti hai, but theek hai, if you'll write no fatigue. Which one never ever get fatigue? Never get fatigue is your heart. The day it will get fatigue, what will happen to you? You will either go to hell or heaven. I don't know, based on your karma. Then the characteristic feature of your heart, very, very, very important, is your, let me change the color, is your intercalated disc. Can you see? Okay. Can you see these line striation? These are nothing but intercalated disc. Intercalated disc have the gap junctions. Have the gap junctions. Do you remember during in structure organization we have studied that helps in the communication? So if you remember, let me just 1 second. See here. So this is your let me change. This is your SA node. This is your AV node. Then you have a AV bundle. Then you have a bundle of his. Then you have a Purkinje fiber, right? Now muscle bol rahi hu, impulse has to pass from SA node to AV node to AV bundle to bundle of his, and from bundle of his to Purkinje fiber. This impulse has to pass very fast. Now if there is no gap junction, how these impulses will be passing from cell to cell? So this is the characteristic feature, very important pyq characteristic feature of the cardiac muscle. Okay. Now, what are the functions? So basically your skeletal muscles help in the locomotion and change in the body posture. Then your visceral muscle helps in the food transportation of the food through the digestive tract. In internal muscle hai na, so internally all the things will be happening. Then gamete transportation, that is fallopian tube dikhaya tha na, so ova is moving from here to here. So this gamete through the genital tract, ये कैसे करता है? स्मूथ मसल है ना, कॉन्ट्रैक्शन, पेरिस्टालिटिक मूवमेंट विल हैपन. सो फिलोपियन ट्यूब में पेरिस्टालिटिक मूवमेंट, अ वेव लाइक मूवमेंट विल हैपन अलोंग विद द सीलिया. सो easily egg or the zygote will be able to move. ठीक है. Then the what is the function of your heart? Obviously rhythmic pumping of the blood to the entire body, that is transportation of the blood to the entire body. Now, very important PYQ, where it is present. So, where your cardiac muscle will be present? Obviously, in the heart. Then, where your skeletal muscle is present? Wherever the movement is there. So, where, if even if you don't remember the example, just see which all organ is given. Can you move it voluntary? Now, your limbs, your hands and legs, you can move it voluntary. Your facial muscles, some people can move their eyebrows, their ear, their cheek muscles. All these things you can move. Then your biceps. So these are examples of the skeletal muscle, and this attached to the bone, the skeletal muscle. Naam mein ye na skeletal. Skeletal means what? Bone. That means this muscle is attached to the skeletal. This muscle is attached to the bone. This is PYQ. ठीक है. Rest everything will fall for the visceral muscle. I told you na, visceral means internal organ, especially कौन से organ? Hollow organ. So inner wall of the hollow organ will have the visceral muscle. For example, your alimentary canal from mouth till anus. Hollow है ना, तभी तो foot is passing from mouth till anus, right? So alimentary canal will have the smooth muscle. तभी तो esophagus में your peristaltic movement will happen. Then reproductive tract अभी बताया, fallopian tube. Then your blood vessels hollow होती है ना, contraction and relaxation. Do you remember? So this contraction and relaxation क्यों हो पाती है? Because the smooth muscle, अगर वो body fluid याद आ रहा है, तो second layer, second tunica interna is the internal one. Tunica media is made up of smooth muscle, which helps in the contraction and the relaxation, right? Then your eye, iris, eye में iris and ciliary muscle is made up of your smooth muscle. That's all in today's class. In next class, we are going to study about the structure of skeletal muscle. Thank you, everyone.